Hello and welcome everyone to the Emancipated Citizen podcast, where normally we bring to you the voices of some of the bravest men and women talking about their struggles against authoritarianism across the world. I am your host, zacaalrayyis.
And I'm Benjamin Snow. And sorry we haven't been able to upload very much. I moved back to my home state. And good news, I am sponsoring our future tech guy for someone in the US. Bad news, he's not here yet. And I am working 2 jobs to be able to afford to take care of him once he gets here.
Yeah, not to give too much information about this person, but yeah, I mean we've had some significant help from people in other parts of the world, and yeah, people I say who our mission is very close to them as well, and yeah, that's just kind of to say that this is not just an effort of the people that you listen to. Um, Myself and Benjamin, there are actually a number of people behind the scenes that are making this work and giving us brilliant ideas and doing some of the tech stuff and so on. So, yeah, many thanks to those people who know who they are and will not be publicly identified.
Yeah. But I'm getting too old to be working 2 jobs and doing this at the same time. So at least going forward until one of my jobs goes on hiatus, I probably will not be able to make it to every single recording.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. We're not getting paid for this at this point, and yeah, sometimes there are priorities in life, right? I mean, talking about future episodes, our next guest on the podcast is going to be Mohammed Nofal, who is an ex-Muslim with a pretty amazing story. He came out as an atheist in front of national television, basically. Got verbally abused, and he wasn't able to have the discussion that he was promised, basically. Later, things got very difficult for him in Egypt. I'm going to be making a video about this, kind of introducing the topic and releasing it to our YouTube channel, and we'll also be talking to Muhammad more in depth about this topic and this series of events. And yeah, talking about YouTube videos, actually, we are starting up on YouTube. We are going to be uploading each of our episodes on a weekly basis to our YouTube channel, which is, of course, also going to be linked to the podcast. If you do happen to be listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever it may be, we are going to be, like I said, uploading previous episodes that we recorded. We're also going to be making videos about future topics that we want to cover, that kind of thing. So find us on YouTube. Would be very happy to see some growth on this brand new channel. Also, of course, we're on Instagram and Facebook. So check us out there. Yeah, in case we haven't mentioned it, by the way, it seems like for our next interview with Mohammed Nofal, Benjamin is not going to be able to make it. But instead of that, we are going to have his insights on this episode, which is, like I said, just going to be the two of us talking about recent events. More specifically, the Olympics, the controversy around the Algerian boxer Iman Khalif, the recent lawsuit that she filed against Twitter, Elon Musk, J.K. Rowling, and a number of people who have been harassing her on the internet nonstop for the past month.
And so many people we never would have expected this from. Or at least one person we never would have expected this from.
I am going to ask you who that is because I'm not entirely sure
Well,
who
Richard
who, who you
Dawkins.
mean. Oh, Richard Dawkins. Actually, I mean, for a while he's been talking about this kind of thing. It doesn't surprise me at this point.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, let me
yeah,
rephrase that. Utter stupidity and just spouting out opinions that have a definitive answer without checking the definitive answer. Wouldn't expect that from him. As much of an asshole as he can be.
we're gonna circle back to that, of course. Yeah, it is actually quite shocking. Not the opinions themselves. I mean, he's expressed some unsavory opinions about the transgender community in the past, of course, but just, I mean, the level of confusion and stupidity in his more recent rhetoric is kind of a cause for alarm, which is really a shame because he has been a very formative figure, a very formative author in my, let's say, my intellectual development. And yeah, J.K. Rowling for a certain amount of time until the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child came out, and I read that play. And so, what kind of garbage is this? I
I'm.
mean,
Oh
everything before
no.
that was so good, but I don't
Oh
know.
no. I'm starting to think Harry Potter is true. That a wizard wrote these books and just asked their pet phoenix to just drop them in someone's lap so the story could get out. And that person's lap was J.K. Rowling because everything she's written since doesn't match the standard. And yeah, the cursed child was. It sounded like bad fan fiction.
Horrible fanfiction. I mean, yeah, I guess a certain level of separating an artist from the art has to be done. Especially, you look historically, and a lot of the greatest intellectuals are awful people in other kind of ways. And I guess I guess that becomes more and more the case the older you get in a developing world, and people aren't always able to catch up to certain things. I mean,
Or they go
looking at
backwards
things
themselves.
looking at things recently, I was like, God, please, don't let me live long enough to uh, make a fool out of myself like that, and make people remember an actually great legacy with just something that's really stupid at the end. Um, and in this spirit, I decided to uptake my tobacco consumption.
Please tell
I
me
think
you're kidding.
I think if I smoke twice as much tobacco as I have been, then maybe I wouldn't reach an age where I start ruining things for myself that way. I mean, I don't know. I've never been the kind of person who, maybe this is gonna change when I'm older, but I feel like sometimes the people with the greatest legacies are people who die young. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, I won't be pulling that off by consuming more tobacco or alcohol. I'll be pulling it off by consuming more sugar because apparently I need to do everything the most boring way possible.
wonderful. To each their own. Do it your own way. Um, I mean, honestly, just as a complete tangent here, I've always been more afraid of the effects of old age than I have been of an early death, right? Like, the idea of dying like relatively young doesn't scare me so much, but the idea of living a very long life where at the end I just don't know anything, what's around me, everything hurts, uh, just
Zach,
this kind of life quality, I'm like, please, I want to die before that. I mean,
Zach, you
that,
see the
yeah,
gray patch in my beard?
sure.
Shut up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But
Okay,
no,
anyway.
no. What I think is I think you're wrong about this. I don't think it's that they're getting old. I think that they're now all suffering from brain rot, a particular type of brain rot facilitated by internet and adoring fans. We probably won't get that to happen to us. But look at the
Yeah.
degeneration Elon Musk has shown.
So, hear that, people, don't subscribe to our channel, don't follow our podcasts,
No, do
don't
that. Do that.
overly adore us.
Yeah. Just don't treat us like gods because we aren't. I think we're sane enough to realize we aren't.
Aside from, well, okay, this whole aside about age and you know descent into madness kind of thing. What I was talking about and was going to get to is how this controversy relates to the way that the transgender community is perceived around the world and the way that LGBT rights are viewed in the Middle East, what the state of the LGBTQ plus community in the Middle East is, specifically in Algeria, and how something like that can make things so much worse for people who don't even necessarily identify with that community themselves, but might exhibit a gender expression that's not considered traditional. More specifically, I mean, especially if as it affects this specific boxer, Iman Khalif, who has been endlessly harassed over the past month. I am sure that certain relationships, certain things in her life might become more difficult, although, to be completely honest, I don't see that as the biggest concern, right?
Yeah, and I mean, she's a female boxer from a very misogynistic country. First of all, well, yeah. First of all, she's probably used to some of it. Second of all, who exactly is going to harass her to her face?
I guess. I mean, a gold medal Olympic champion will, in many circles, be seen as kind of a national hero and protected here and there, and she has the resources. And I'm sure there are going to be inconvenient interactions here or there. But I mean, what does this communicate to people in the selection process, for example, people who are closely involved with things like women's sports or sports in general, right? How people are very likely going to be discriminated against in the future when it comes to this field specifically. But I mean, it's easy to imagine how this can spill over in many other parts of life, right? On this topic of LGBT rights in Algeria, I mean, it should be clear to everyone from the onset, basically, that look, Algeria has a horrible record of LGBT rights, along with most other North African nations. Same-sex relationships are criminalized. Transgender people are not able to legally change their names or live as the gender that they are or get married as the gender that they are. There are no legal protections against discrimination for those people. There is basically no legal recognition for the trans community. Like I said, in general, LGBT rights are at a very bad place in Algeria, and I think we should be more careful about anything that can escalate that kind of situation. When it comes to specific cases of persecution, I'm not so intimately involved with what's been going on in Algeria, although I do know that in other countries, especially where you have those kinds of discriminatory religious regulations and laws, people do get harassed even by government officials for looking at certain ways that aren't typical to, yeah, what's considered typically male or female. The first example that I can pick off the top of my head is that of Tariq bin Aziz, who is a Saudi Arabian activist who has for quite a while advocated for things like women's rights and LGBT rights in the country, while also being, yeah, very openly supportive of the state, the monarchy, and I don't know, kind of pushing for some sort of internal change. That was, of course, until he was harassed by a Saudi policeman for allegedly not looking male enough. Yes. Basically, are you a man? Are you a woman? Why are you dressed this way? Why do you express yourself that way? He went on the internet to complain about this experience that he had, and as a result of that, he was arrested. Yeah, now This man primarily lives in the United States and eventually was able to go back. And after that, he didn't see any point in trying to maintain those bridges. So he publicly came out as gay after all of those years of low key advocacy. This is an example of an incredibly privileged person. How it happens for somebody with a lot of privilege who is able to move across the globe and build a life elsewhere and have a large social media following to ask about his whereabouts and know about his struggle. Somebody who can't be just disappeared and buried, if you will. The kinds of challenges that gender non-conforming people face in those countries are immense. And I think this is probably the number one issue that I take with those old British people echoing baseless accusations and theories about a person, about the state of a person's genitals or their chromosomes or their eligibility to compete in the sport that they're competing in, despite the fact that there are transparent and rigorous vetting procedures when it comes to things like women's boxing, when it comes to the Olympics in general. There are many tests that people go through. There are also sex verification tests that are run by the International Olympic Committee. And by the way, for the past few years, transgender people have been explicitly banned from the Olympics. Yeah, at least when it comes to women's sports. Those people writing nonstop about transgender people overtaking the Olympics and making this whole global event about the fucking woke mind virus and the transgender agenda and they're coming for your kids and they want to rape you in your bathrooms kind of rhetoric,
Yeah.
completely unfounded. And
And it
I
seems like there's some inherent hypocrisy in being so concerned about who's in women's spaces that you want to check everyone's genitals.
yes, I mean, look, when it comes to qualifying for different sporting categories, when it comes to boxing specifically, I know there are weight categories. There are guidelines on what we consider traditionally women's categories on testosterone levels and things like that, right? Part of the whole idea, I guess the whole idea around sports is you want to see a fair and engaging and unpredictable competition, right? And I mean, personally, I think sports are boring either way, but for people who don't find sports boring, it's like if you know who's gonna win from the beginning of any match, then it's not exciting, right? So you do want to have certain categories and guidelines, so that people compete against each other in a fair game, in a relatively equal kind of competition. And the idea that it's even possible for transgender women or men masquerading as women, as those people would prefer to express it, the idea that men masquerading as women can just go to women's sporting competitions and take over the whole thing and they become all of the top athletes and women are pushed out of women's sports. Have you seen something like that ever happen? Is anything even close? I mean,
Yeah, how many men would be willing to have a sex change if they didn't if they weren't trans? I don't see that being a thing. I don't see anybody doing that
that's
lightly.
not, that's not even like that's not even necessarily what it's about. I mean, a large part of the narrative is basically You have those propaganda. There was this Ben Shapiro movie a while ago about this satirical movie about transgender women in sports, and you have basically a man who one day decides to be a woman and walks into some female boxing competition, and it's
I would expect
it's
nothing.
it's really the way that they imagine things are happening right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I would expect nothing less from the man who thought a wet vagina was a disease. Honestly.
I mean, look, I really don't want to have the conversation about when is a trans woman allowed to compete in which sport based on which standards, right?
Yeah.
And who should be allowed in this category or that category, and how I mean, I know some people are calling for more inclusion by restructuring kind of gendered categories into ones that maybe aren't so specifically or explicitly gendered, but have things to do with gender characteristics which vary across even the cisgender population. That's a completely different discussion that I do not have anywhere near the expertise to even begin forming an opinion on, and I don't want to. I don't want to go into that. I don't think it's really my business. Just like whether it's also something that I've been talking to. Somebody's been talking to me about how certain surgeries that that certain transition related surgeries have medical risks that might not be acceptable or whatnot. It's like, okay, you have doctors who study for years and years and know the ins and outs about those surgeries, their risks, the medical ethics of informed consent, how many checks there have to be before a patient is provided what they demand, what kinds of discussions are to be had and so on. And here it's kind of the exact same thing. Yeah, if Benjamin were to tomorrow come out as transgender and he wants to go to the local women's boxing club and fight there as a woman, would that make sense? Probably not.
Yeah.
No.
I have a
It
feeling
would.
they could all beat the crap out of me as it is. I've never
Probably. I mean,
boxed,
you're not a
nor.
boxer. Yeah. In any case, I mean, there are probably parameters to kind of check that. Maybe certain matchups aren't fair enough to meet the standard of sport, basically, right? Because sport is supposed to be fair, insofar as I understand sport, to some degree. So where do we draw the lines, right? Where how do we set those categories?
Yeah, and there's one other thing to take into account too.
Yeah, go on.
This whole discussion is focused on one direction. It's talking about about either trans women or women who have high testosterone levels. Simultaneously, it's my understanding a fair number of elite male athletes actually have super low testosterone levels. Are they going to be forced to compete as women? Of course not. No one would ever demand that. And at my work yesterday, we did some target shooting. And for some reason, all the married men there were talking about how their wives are such better shots than they are. I heard that genders got split up for Olympic target shooting because women started winning. But does this mean that an exceptionally effeminate man might have some advantage and might be forced to compete as a woman because he's beating all the other men?
Yeah, I have no
Sounds
idea
doubtful.
what it looks like when it comes to shooting, when it comes to all of those, like, to comes to different sports. I mean, boxing is one thing, running is another thing. Ping pong is completely different thing. Swimming is different. They even separate chess by gender. They don't let men and women compete against each other in chess.
What? That's okay.
So
Okay.
a lot of it is just a long tradition of gender segregation that really doesn't have any basis in a scientifically demonstrable advantage or disadvantage of one sex or another. And even if there is like a slight edge that maybe women on average are slightly better at shooting, so what? So most of the champions are going to be women. So when it comes to different sports, as I was saying, and when it comes to those standards, you have people who are very well educated on what brings people advantages and disadvantages and so on. And I would very much wish that the people in charge of those things would not be caving to the fear mongers who are going completely crazy about transgender women taking over women's sports. The decision to ban transgender athletes from the Olympics was not based on any conclusive research showing that they always have an inherent advantage in every sport over cisgender athletes. It's basically based on optics, right? They didn't want women to feel basically hounded by men in their spaces or feel like they are unfairly disadvantaged in cases where same they might lose a competition, that kind of thing. Yeah. So what I understand from that is basically it's caving to the transphobic rhetoric going around. It's not based on anything concrete there. Yeah. That being what it is, I mean, this is what the people responsible there have decided, and I would hope that within those circles, better representatives would come up to work out this problem of inclusion and looking at the fact that athletes, especially Olympic athletes, are kind of viewed as ambassadors for their countries, as representatives for their countries, right? The Olympics should kind of have representative power to include all the shapes and colors and types of human beings that we have around the world, and people from all different communities should feel represented in this kind of event, right? Which, I mean, this is also part of the big outrage of over the treatment that Iman Khalif has been receiving, because she goes there, she's representing her country, and she's slandered. So, so there is this view going around that this is something that needs to be made an example of. But as far as the slander case goes, that is being litigated in Paris, that's more an Imam Khalif thing, right? It's about slander, it's about false statements about her gender, but it's not about the representation of the trans community, or it doesn't concern that the specific dimension of it as much, even though the trans community has been dehumanized and also slandered throughout this whole shitstorm. And I think if there is a lesson to be taken out of all of this, it's probably that we do need more trans representation in this kind of global show of human diversity, right? Maybe we should have transgender people on the world stage with gold medals, with whatever, just showing the world that they exist and they function and so on. Um,
Or do you think it would be a bad idea? Just spitballing here. Do you think it might be a bad idea to have a third category of people who don't fit neatly into either end of the gender binary.
Like I said, the whole discussion about categorization and which way it's which way we should categorize athletes is not a discussion I want to even begin because it's not something I know very much about, and there might be much better ways of doing it. You might be right. I will withhold comment on this specific question.
Yeah. I'm just surprised nobody suggested that at all yet. It's almost like most of the people commenting don't want trans people to be recognized anywhere, under any circumstances, or even exist in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so where do the allegations even come from that this woman is transgender or intersex or shouldn't be qualified or is a man, as J.K. Rowling very directly would say on her Twitter, this is a man beating up a woman. In 2023, Iman Khalif was part of an international boxing competition where she was faced against a Russian boxer, right, who had an undefeated record. After the match, the CEO of the International Boxing Association declared that after that Iman Khalif had failed gender or sex verification tests thereby disqualifying her from the competition after the fact. Their internal task force basically rubber stamped the public statements already made by their president. And by the way, for entirely separate reasons, since 2019, the International Boxing Association has been facing many allegations of corruptions. The International Olympic Committee even suspended its recognition of the organization indefinitely until this day. I mean, there's something to be said about. I mean, if the International Olympic Committee was directly citing the allegations that it was increasingly serving Russian interests over, yeah, fairness in international competition, then this is also a factor that has to be kind of kept in mind, especially considering that she broke an undefeated record of a Russian boxer before that thing happened, and the idea that also that the sex verification test there would include a DNA test that could show that somebody has XY chromosomes, which was the claim that was made by Kremlin, the president of the International Boxing Association, is also very dubious because normally genetic tests of that sort are not carried out and they're not very useful anyway
Because biology is a lot more complicated than XX and XY, and always is in any possible subject.
basically so because yeah, biology is more complicated than that, and hormones affect your development, they affect your bone density, they affect your muscle mass, they affect a lot of things in your life. The your chromosomes, they form the genetic basis for the hormonal development that you're going to have, but it's it is actually the case that there are women out there with completely female bodies who are insensitive to testosterone, right? So the male hormones never take effect in the way that would trigger male puberty, and yeah, basically they, other than a few atypical kind of things, like not actually having female gametes and not menstruating, for all intents and purposes they are women, their bodies function as
Yeah.
women,
And appear more feminine than most women, too. And a couple years ago, there was an even more extreme case. There's a mother and daughter who were both found to be XY, and the daughter's Y chromosome came from the father, but she got pregnant, gave birth, and had XY chromosomes, and by all appearances may have been in the middle of a very long chain of XY women. There's some very specific thing that stopped one little thing stopped the Y chromosome from having an effect. So she could be in the middle of a chain of 1,000 people who were female in every possible way except for having an X and a Y chromosome. She was not more feminine than most women, though. In her case, I believe she had some minorly non-gender conforming features.
I mean, a big issue that this whole story has to it is that, okay, obviously, a claim made after the fact has so much less credibility, especially coming from a source that is known to be corrupt and serving Russian interests. Um, and then the claim itself that somebody would prove the kinds of chromosomes that a person has, as though that were the most efficient way to qualify or disqualify somebody for from fair competition. Right, that's all just kind of absurd. I mean, you can test testosterone levels, things like, I don't know, muscle density, whatever. There are different biological markers that, if like phenotypic markers that have much more of a real world effect. Just looking at basically just looking at somebody's genotype and making conclusions from that. That's not you don't do that generally. Those are reasons to be very skeptical of the claims that are being made there, right?
And Russians getting incredibly petty about something like this? I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you.
Yeah. Just 1 minute, another minute, looking up some source. Yeah. Yeah. So going to the Friendly Atheist article about this specific topic when it comes to Richard Dawkins, which I'm also going to link for people to check to themselves for themselves, which was part of my research before doing this episode. Richard Dawkins has been tweeting some completely unhinged shit lately. This one meme that goes, biker who identifies as a cyclist wins the Tour de France. First biological cheetah who identifies as a man to take gold for Liechtenstein at the Paris Gold Medals. Are there cheetahs in Liechtenstein? And also,
You, it's the 21st century. You can have a cheetah anywhere.
didn't this joke get old in like 2016 with the I identify as an attack helicopter.
Zach, if I couldn't see you talking, I would have sworn you spliced in the laugh track there. But yes, it's been old for a very long time. He's kind of an embarrassment at this point, and like you were saying earlier, he has flushed his own legacy down the toilet.
A little bit.
Plus, I hear he's incredibly rude to his fans when he meets them in person.
He's I've met him a couple of times, and he's not the most approachable person for sure. Yeah. But I mean, I'm not necessarily gonna hold that against him. I've also noticed that he's an unusually introverted kind of person. He has kind of this close circle of people that he wants to talk to and hang out with, and also if you have those fans that are, oh, I like your work, I like this, and yeah, okay, I want to have a more meaningful discussion than that, and after the thousandth time it gets a little bit old, and okay, yeah, some people are nicer about it. It's not it's not the biggest fault of character that I would condemn him for here. But I do understand what you're saying.
I'm just wondering how, if he has so much trouble talking to the public, why did he get the position as the chair of public education about science, or whatever his exact title was?
I mean, look, he's an effective communicator. I don't know like how it is today. I mean, at least in his career, he's, if you've read The Selfish Gene, The Blind Watchmaker, The Magic of Reality, The Extended Phenotype, he's an incredibly eloquent communicator. He's able to give talks that just leave you in awe and really wanting to learn more about the topic that he's talking about. And when he's talking about, about the things that he's actually an expert on, still, I mean he's a very inspiring speaker, so I get that. Yeah, at least, like, if you're not approaching him at a conference, or doing a fangirl thing around, it's like he's a good communicator. I completely get that. I do wish that he would stay to his field and to science. I mean, even when he wrote The God Delusion, it's not entirely within his field of expertise exactly. And there are people who have better philosophy kind of backgrounds, and who can deal with a lot of those lines of thought maybe a little better than Dawkins can. The problem is with a lot of those people is that they're absolutely brilliant in their fields, and they inspire people. They bring the science forward. People are celebrating them, and maybe at a certain point they think that they're entitled to just have an opinion on everything, and that they are God's gift to humanity when it comes to a perspective on literally anything in the world. And sometimes when they open their mouths and say something that is completely unrelated to their fields, a lot of the people who have started out really respecting him just kind of losing respect for him.
On this case, I almost wonder if he thinks it is his field, because it is kind of biology.
Um,
A different part of biology, to be sure, but still biology. I wonder if he just has gotten past the point where he can recognize that. I mean, we wouldn't go to him to talk about medicine, which is also
yeah, I mean, he's,
biology.
he's, he's an evolutionary biologist. He understands evolution very well, obviously. When it comes to those complicated societal questions about identity and culture, there's probably something that a sociologist would have to say on this. That a linguist would have to say on it. It's not just purely a matter of genetics and evolution. Talking a little more about Richard Dawkins, I'll try not to make this whole thing about Richard Dawkins, but Richard Dawkins also had this whole fight, I guess, with Facebook, because he accused them of taking down his Facebook page for making a tweet that is bigoted towards this Algerian boxer.
And it was already down because it appeared to have been hacked, and he got an email about it and then claimed that it was censorship anyway. Although, since when has Facebook censored anything for what they said on Twitter?
Such a big fiasco. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, he just goes, "Oh, my Facebook was deleted for no apparent reason. I don't know what's happening. Was it something I said?" Apparently, there was an email. They told him that his account has been hacked, and that's why it was down, and he needed to fix some permission stuff. But he didn't notice any of that. Later on, he started tweeting about this Algerian boxer and calling her a man, and saying really shitty things about her, and got retweeted by Elon Musk, and using the wording of friendly atheist amplified by a chorus of bigots, until a representative from Facebook responded. explaining the situation to him in public that, hey, your account was hacked, you didn't respond to our email, this is why it's down. And also, you look at the timeline, the tweets in question, first of all, happened after the page was taken down. And second of all, I mean, why would Facebook take down your page for something you said on a completely different platform? None of this makes sense. I don't know him on a personal level. I just kind of the level of character knowledge that I have of him, I wouldn't presume that he's doing this kind of thing on purpose. It just seems like the kind of thing that an extremely confused old man would do. He's just extremely confused. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know which day it is. He doesn't know when this happened and that happened, and like and um, what might indicate why your Facebook page was blocked, and the fact that Facebook doesn't have anything to do with Twitter. I mean, this all just screams to me. Yeah, this is just an extremely confused person, as an extremely disoriented person, right?
Yeah. Hence my supposition that it's brain rot, although it may be a type of brain rot that's as old as time in this case.
Possibly, possibly. Speaking about the Russian International Boxing Association, uh, Russian interference with this whole thing. I'm sure after after the Russians basically weren't allowed to to join the Olympics, they like a lot of people in the Kremlin were butthurt there, and I'm sure they were really happy to see this shit show go down around the women's boxing part of the Olympics, and I guess when it comes to a few other controversies that made the Olympics this year look like a shit show, and they've all arguably also had their part in kind of fanning the flames there. Um, Ben, there, you wanted to say something about Russian interference or controversy surrounding this year's Olympics
Yeah,
and
there
Russia.
was also a Ukrainian fencer who won the world championship, and it was about a year ago now at the world championship, not the Olympics, where she was told that when she was facing a Russian opponent, it would be good enough for them to touch swords, not shake hands, because imagine why a Ukrainian wouldn't want to shake a Russian's hand right now. And I gather that the Russian fencer in question was a bit of a vatnik, so extra don't want to. But she'd been told that you just need to touch swords. So since she didn't shake hands, the Russian commissioners went after her, and the her Russian opponent apparently made a big fuss. If you want better details about this, listen to our friends at Ukraine Without Hype. They went into depth about it, and they tried to get her banned from the Olympics for that kerfuffle. Which you want someone to do what you want to do something, tell them what you want them to do. It always works that way. It causes nothing but trouble when you expect people to read your mind, and when you lie to them about what you want them to do, it's your own fault if they don't do it. It shouldn't
Mm.
be rocket science, but apparently it is.
And what effect did that have on this year's Olympics?
Well, they tried to keep her out of it because of that. Although considering that Russia isn't allowed to compete right now, not even because of the war, because of all of the doping they've done, all the Russian athletes have to compete as independent athletes in quotes, and their medals do not get counted as Russian medals because they have such a big doping problem. Which that's
Mm.
communists always had that problem. Russia may not be communist, but they still dope like mad.
Yeah,
Probably not even
yeah,
that
and
unique in it.
number of Russian athletes actually accepted the Olympic invitations, only to have the Kremlin decline them after that on their behalfs. So that also contributes to why we didn't see any Russian athletes in this year's Olympics, unfortunately, because if you know anything about this project and what we've been talking about on this podcast, I think it's important to separate people from their authoritarian governments. And I know a number of wonderful Russians, and I think representation of the Russian people would be a cool thing to have if there was a sensible way to go about that.
Yeah, and well, we will probably be. If you're familiar enough with Russia to understand what I'm about to say, we are rapidly approaching the time when international athletics, especially the mixed martial arts, will have a whole bunch of people who are Rossianis, but not Ruskies, just to say from Russia, but not ethnic Russians, who probably don't even identify as Russians. There was a big, when the terrorist attacks had just happened, that ISIS just carried out, there was somebody who was, I guess, went to a gym that was owned by a Dagestani MMA fighter, and he's basically from the a citizen of the UAE at this point. There's probably just going to be more and more people like this over time, and well, there probably going to be a lot more of them in mixed martial arts than ethnic Russians, at least compared to their relative populations.
Russia is becoming a worse and worse place to live in by the day.
Yeah. Oh, and just
Um,
because Caucasians are pride themselves on being tough, that is probably the bigger part of it.
mm,
and
yeah.
don't and don't drink much.
Yep. Yeah. As I was saying, Russia is becoming a worse and worse place to live by the day. It's becoming completely unlivable. On the one side, you have the sanctions by most of the rest of the world. On the other side, the government itself is getting more and more restrictive. It's blocking the internet. It's getting into people's lives. It's stopping them on the streets to check their phones. Russians are feeling increasingly unsafe, and a lot of Russians just want out now. I mean, of course, we have shown our great sympathy to the Ukrainian people and their struggle right now. But I think we should also kind of recognize the immense struggles that a lot of people in Russia are facing
And especially the
today.
LGBT Russians.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, in addition to their various Olympic shenanigans, Russia also has laws that have been called gay propaganda laws. They basically said you couldn't promote homosexuality to children, which basically meant you couldn't even be out around children. Children couldn't even know you were out. The journalist Masha Gessen, who wrote a number of pretty good books, had to send her adopted child to New York without, and then go join their adopted child with her partner and their two other kids because they were thought there was a risk that they'd be taken away. And a few months after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they updated them. You cannot be out to you cannot mention being LGBT in public in any way or support it in any way. And of course, homophobes have always tried to link homosexuality and pedophilia. It's super common in Russia. I've encountered a number of Russian trolls who seem to think everything is pedophilia, except for Putin pulling up a small boy's shirt and kissing his stomach in public, which is deeply weird at best.
I'm sure the concept of double speak is basically how it comes from George Orwell's 1984. Basically, you say something, if you're on one side, then it's true. If you're on another side, and there's a different subtext to it, then it can be false. And I mean, the best example I can think of is how the war is being treated. Right, if you're against the war and you call it a war, then you're not allowed to call it a war, and you can get punished for that. But if you're for the war and say this is a justified war, then you can call it a war all you want because it is a war. So it both is and isn't a war at the same time, and in that way, and yeah. So I guess what. I guess the thing with pedophilia is kind of like that, right? It something is pedophilia and it's not pedophilia based on whether the person who does it has power. It's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's all these like important people who turn out to be pedophiles who move to Russia. There's a YouTube channel called Combat Veterans Reacts where he just went over a video made by this guy who was an Air Force veteran who got into his local city council, and then when he was, after being arrested for soliciting explicit videos from a 17-year-old, just went off to Russia and joined a unit of foreigners within the Russian military, which apparently which was news. A lot of it seemed like that wasn't a thing. They just put foreigners in all their military units. And they're even calling this satanic, which, weirdly enough, Russia's been saying Ukrainians are Satanists. They also shared a bunch of videos of the Ukrainian equivalent of Santa Claus and Halloween. Russia was Christian from the beginning. There was never a pagan Russia, unless you count the Kiev and Rus. The Kiev and Rus followed the old Slavic gods. Some of those traditions remain in Ukraine,
It's
do not
also
in
one of
Russia.
those things that both exists and doesn't exist in the same time. So if you're talking about the history of Christianity and being non-Christian at a certain point, then they didn't exist. But if you're talking about the history of the Russian Empire and why Ukraine belongs to it, then of course they did exist. So
Yeah,
you just need to sophisticate your mind a little bit more so that you can hold multiple truths in it and at the same time just evolve, you know?
yeah. But yeah, while they're screaming about Satanist Ukrainian Satanists, church attendance in Ukraine is several times higher than in Russia. I would posit that it's because Ukrainians like seeing each other more than Vatniks do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean Putin and the Russian government has been going around and waving the accusation of Satanism everywhere to the point where it's like really fucking it's funny and it's sad at the same time. It's like childless people are apparently Satanists. Transgender people are Satanists. Ukrainians are Satanists.
They're also Nazis, and they're planning on being the new Israel because apparently, Jews can't stay in Israel,
Sure,
they're all going to go to Ukraine now.
sure they are.
Both these at
Sure
the
they
same
are.
time.
Yeah, and they're Nazis and they're Zionists and they're communists and they're also Nazis and they're also what
Yeah.
just
Although
they're
I did have a couple
they're
tankies.
Marxist fascists.
Yes, I did have some tankies tell me that Zelensky is a Zionist Nazi, though.
Yeah, sure,
There's a
sure,
chance they were Russian trolls, but I don't think this particular one was. Also informed me that
sure,
my Jewish World War II veteran grandfather was a Nazi.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess it all plays into the a lot of the right wing hysteria is going around, especially when it comes to gender, sexual minorities, and the Kremlin nowadays really fueling that flame and laughing maniacally as the world burns. I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't even like some fringe church thing or some conspiracy theorist thing. I mean, Putin himself accused the West of moving towards open Satanism, and he talks about he was citing the promotion of gay and transgender rights in Europe as an example of Satanism, right? Which I mean, this is kind of an accusation that throughout the centuries, I guess since the beginning of Orthodoxy, there have been heretics and unorthodoxy, and and heretics were always accused of being Satanists, whether they're gay, whether they're atheists, whether they're they have different views on religion or whatever, and it is. I mean, Satan is this kind of literary figure, kind of um, that's there to deter you uh, from questioning authority. And I mean, you look at the different stories he's in, like in the Bible, for example. This is kind of the main theme that goes around, and it's in the Quran as well. I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but in the book of Genesis, how he leads people to eating from the tree of knowledge and actually gaining the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, Satan can be a symbol for defiance, and if it's used as an accusation all the time, I think it's pretty sensible to also kind of own it at a certain point. And yeah, I mean that's kind of part of the reason for maybe if you see some of my pictures in some places, it's part of my aesthetic sometimes. And yeah, I mean, if I'm asked, I do identify as a Satanist. Hail Satan, right?
Yeah, I don't. If I'm going, if I'm going to try to,
Satanists are tolerant of non-Satanists.
oh no, no, if I'm going to try to push back against theocrats, I'm not going to push back by pretending to believe in their evil god. I'm going to
I'm
ignore.
not
I'm going.
pretending anything. I'm not pretending
Yeah,
anything. For me, being a Satanist just means that I like the literary character of Satan, and I like to use him as a symbol kind of uh, to kind of show what I stand for. And that doesn't mean that I believe in the existence of his his
but
existence or anything like that.
but you're
I'm
still
not making
playing in
any
their universe.
I'm
I
not
play in
making
an
any
older
false
universe.
I'm not making any false statements about my beliefs about the world. Like, if you ask me, I don't think he's a historical character. He's a literary character. He's an idea that exists in people's hearts and minds, and shapes the way that we conceive of the world. Um, and this is what it's about for me, and this is why Satanism is meaningful for me, and this is why I identify as a Satanist.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about all the heretics being Satanists, you should also remember a lot of the heretics in quotes were simply people with money that inquisitors wanted. There were many rich people who were taken out by the Inquisition and tortured just so the inquisitors could use their money to buy booze and expensive food and to have a party with. Uh,
Hasn't it always been like that?
yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as the Russian Orthodox Church of today is concerned, Patriarch Kirill is ex KGB. He is a gangster, just like Putin. Uh, almost over a decade ago, he met Putin. He had a big Rolex watch on his wrist. He apparently owns 8 of them. And the Kremlin's censorship department said, we don't really want to show that watch, so they airbrushed it off his wrist, but they didn't airbrush off the reflection on the table. So of course the opposition went nuts sharing that. No, they probably wouldn't. They've all been arrested. And Moscow Patriarch priests in Ukraine have been acting as artillery spotters and giving Russian soldiers death lists. And, well, that's why the Moscow Patriarchate is being banned. It is not an attack on Christianity. The Russian propagandists aren't shutting up about it being an attack against Christianity, but it is because they are, in fact, engaging in treason on a wide scale. And nobody goes to Moscow Patriarch churches anymore. No Ukrainian is going to do that now that they've all lost family members to the Russian military, some of whom were given up by Moscow Patriarchate priests.
I mean that very much plays into how how religion and politics cannot be separated from each other. This kind of separation of, before the war, you had this alignment of, okay, you had the Ukrainian Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, and now, you're like they have almost identical traditions in the Ukrainian
Not only
Orthodox and
that, the
Russian Orthodox Church, but with this invasion, it's yeah. I mean, it's become a religious divide based on a political divide, where you're on one side of the border, you care about certain values, you have certain political agendas, so you would belong to this religion. Right?
also
And
an
it's always
important
been that
detail,
way.
very important detail there. The Kiev Patriarchate did not exist in modern times until 2014. It was created as a response to the first stage of the Russian invasion. So it's split solely because of politics, and the Orthodox Church has always served the state. The Catholic Church had complicated relationships with
Hmm.
the secular governments. They've been at war.
Yeah,
Wasn't even
I'm
considered
sure.
that weird for the Pope to be at war with an Italian noble.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure the topic of what separated the Catholics and the Orthodox. I mean, it's an incredibly fascinating topic that I've I've like spent some time reading on, and I think maybe it's something that we might want to bring in a future episode where we have somebody who has, I don't know, some direct or indirect experience with those churches and gain some more firsthand perspective on this. I think this is probably enough, enough opinionated ramblings from two podcasters on the internet. We're going to be back with you on the next episode with, as we said in the beginning, Mohammed Nofal, a brave Egyptian ex Muslim atheist who came out on national television and suffered the consequences, eventually moving to Germany, where we met and have worked together in the past. And we are going to talk about a range of issues concerning the rights of religious minorities and atheists and leaving Islam. So I hope you're excited for that. Do stay tuned for that. Unfortunately, Benjamin is not going to be able to make it for interview, but yeah, just stay tuned. Ben, do you have any final words? Anything you would like to add before we finish this up?
Nope, just hope everyone's doing well, and I look forward to being able to talk to you more come November.
Well, in conclusion, I do hope for more trans representation in sports because, as we can see, even when they are banned across the board, bigots still find a way to make the whole conversation about them and demonize and dehumanize transgender people without them having any platform or representation to defend themselves from. So I hope that in our next Olympics we are going to see more transgender people. Hopefully, we are going to see more Russian people. If we can get past the problems with doping and corruption and so on, and the war, of course, which is a separate topic. So here's for hoping for a more inclusive Olympics in the future, more inclusive world, more representation, and a global conversation between different communities around the world. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Have a good night. Goodbye.